Hello, everyone. This is Alpha Omega. Today, we're going to take a closer look at intuitive machines. But before we get started, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video. What I'm going to talk about today is based on the announcement they made on March 24th, and I'll be adding a bit more detail to it as we take a closer look at various aspects. Their fourth quarter earnings came in at $54.7 million. That's about an 80% increase compared to the same period last year. That's a big jump. Next, for the whole of 2024, their total revenue was $228 million was raised, which was a record high. It was a record. Yes, so that's what I wanted to mention. And then, as I'll explain later, compared to how much they're spending, their cash reserves are a bit low. So, they issued warrants. By issuing new stock purchase rights, they raised cash. And as of March 10th, they had $385 million. But it feels like even that might not be enough going forward. Yes, so I think it's good to keep that in mind. Next, the order backlog, is $203 million, which is a 22% increase compared to the same period last year. This is also showing a good sign. And then, last time, we were really hoping that IM-2 would succeed, but they ended up falling over during landing. It seems like the radar altimeter didn't work properly, so it landed a bit too quickly. Because of that, it tipped over and the mission ended in just one day. But according to their own assessment, they say they completed the mission. So, things like Nokia's communication equipment and NASA's drill were successfully delivered. And they're also saying that they successfully reached the targeted spot at the South Pole, as planned. So, fortunately in the midst of all this, they say they received 90% of the payment they were supposed to get for carrying out this mission from SLID. Apparently, they got all of that even before launching the spacecraft. They already mentioned this during the conference call, so they received $15.8 million. If you think about it, Nokia and NASA might be a bit upset, but these guys got their money, so that's that. From now on, they really can't afford mistakes. If they lose trust, all their customers will leave. Now, let me tell you, here they mention something called trajectory refinement. And then, the term precision orbital maneuvers comes up. So, what does this mean? Well, as I've interpreted here, it means they controlled the flight path more accurately, and it means they maneuvered the orbit with greater precision. When IM-2 will, it was the same for IM-1 and for IM-2 as well. They made extremely precise and detailed adjustments to the orbit. What this means, I'll explain more about this later, but this is the core capability of the OTV. So, what is an OTV? It stands for Orbital Transfer Vehicle. So, they're going to call it Nebula as a nickname. They mentioned this during the conference call, and to put it simply, we can just think of it as a space taxi. We'll take a closer look at this space taxi a bit later. Alright, well, every slide here is important. Here, you can see IM-3 and IM-4 coming up. There are also more reservations lined up for 2028, but anyway, IM-3 is scheduled for launch in 2026. That's the launch. One is already reserved. IM-4, they're saying, is scheduled for 2027, and besides these, they're also expecting to win additional contracts for NASA's commercial payload services. I'll explain a bit more about this. So, just like before, both IM-3 and IM-4 will be carrying payloads from other companies. But what's more important is, we're going to be carrying, the first lunar data relay satellite, what we now call the relay satellite. They'll be carrying the first unit. IM-3 will carry the first one, and then IM-4 will carry 2 more. After that, 1 more will be launched in 2028 and another in 2029. So in total, they'll launch 5 lunar orbit satellites. What's the purpose of all this? So, it's called NSN Solar, and its purpose is to establish a direct data communication network between the Moon and Earth. That's the main goal of NSNS. To achieve this, a total of 5 satellites will be launched by 2029. That's how we can sum it up, but if things go well, it could be extended until 2034. And as for the contract type, like I mentioned during the Black Sky discussion, it's an IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. What is that again? It stands for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, which means that during the contract period, they place orders frequently, and as needed. NASA does this. So every time they place an order, you have to manufacture the product and deliver it. This is now called NASA or the European Space Agency, ESA. I mentioned before that this is a method they really prefer, and the maximum contract amount for this is up to several $billion. It's enormous. 6 trillion 1. 4. Interactive, IM3, and IM4 are extremely important. We really have to do a good job with this. Let me emphasize that again here. So, here we see NSNS, mentioned again. It's about building a network between the Moon and Earth. And here, this is the Moon. You see the Moon, right? Do you see the 5 satellites orbiting the Moon? Yes, they've even illustrated this in a diagram. So, right now, they're the only ones who have exclusively secured this contract on their own, standing out from the rest. So, please keep this in mind. Now, next, earlier when we talked about IM Theta, we mentioned the so-called orbital transfer vehicle, Nebula, which is also referred to as the air taxi or space taxi. So, what is this? With IM Theta, they were able to position the spacecraft extremely precisely and accurately in orbit. This can really be called a core technology. It's a core technology of intuitive machines. But now, based on this, they're planning to launch other businesses. If you look, okay, up until now, they focused on CLPS, but from now on, you could say they've officially announced the expansion into orbital transfer and space logistics services. So, what does that mean? I've explained it below as well. It means delivering the payloads that customers want to various orbits. For example, you launch from Earth. You drop off a payload at, say, Sales, then fly further and drop off another payload at a different altitude, and then go even further to deliver a payload to lunar orbit. And how far does it go? It goes all the way to the surface of the Moon. So, it can deliver the payloads that customers want to a variety of different orbits. That's what we're planning to do now. So, you can think of this as what we call an OTV, an orbital transfer vehicle, and we're going to call it Nebula. So, in my opinion, this is also pretty good. The spacecraft we saw earlier in IM Theta, that lunar lander was called Nova C. It was the long-shaped one, but if you go to their website now, you'll see something called Nova D. It's really big. I'll show you a picture later, but the difference here is that the payload capacity becomes very large. Nova C now carries 100 kilograms, up from 75. With this, they can carry a lot more payload at once and provide OTV services. Their revenue will increase significantly. So, just keep in mind that they've said they plan to offer these kinds of services in the future for a variety of customers, including private companies, NASA, and the Department of Defense. So, this OHV can go to low Earth orbit, then to geostationary orbit, geostationary surface, and even to lunar orbit, or the lunar surface. Yeah, I tried to illustrate this with a diagram. Now, here's something really important. This NSNS, as I mentioned earlier, is worth about 500 trillion or 600 trillion won in Korean currency. I said it's about $4.8 billion, and I mentioned that IM Theta is launching satellites here. But there's actually one more thing. It's called the Direct-to-Earth Service. I'll refer to it as DTE for short. So what is this? Well, If the others communicate between the Earth and the Moon via satellites, this one is about sending data directly from the Moon to Earth without using any relay satellites. So that's why it's called DTE. Now, let's take a look. Let's start from the bottom here. Now, even though it looks like their research failed because it collapsed, they actually achieved some results. Because it's been confirmed that they sent about 400 megabytes of data from the lunar surface to Earth. And here, a direct message was successfully sent from the Moon to Earth. The data was received. So, in the IM Theta mission, for the first time in human history, a private company, meaning Intuitive Machines here, accomplished this. A private company, using its own network, direct to Earth, successfully transmitted data to NASA's data communications. So, first of all, the data was sent accurately, and through this, what they said was, let's take a look at some additional details here. Award, additional. And there's a lot more. So basically, because they received the data well from IM Theta, they were awarded additional contracts. So, first of all, IM Theta successfully launched into lunar orbit, and then, including sending data directly back to Earth, DT, there's up to $4.9 billion. $4.8 billion at stake. The point is, they need to maximize their earnings from this. That's how we can understand it. I've organized it here, but doesn't it look a bit odd? It's kind of old-fashioned. Alright, this is the lunar surface. IM Theta S lander has arrived on the Moon's surface. From here, it sends data directly with a powerful antenna. This DTE is the data communication network for that lunar Intuitive Machines lander. From here, they were able to successfully transmit data by interfacing with NASA's Deep Space Network. So, they even talked about this at the conference. They also mentioned that the private company's data communication network and NASA's data communication network were well integrated. So, they're viewing this very positively. I think this is something you can also take note of. So, here, what they call the DSN is shown in this picture. If you look here, you can see this really big antenna. They say there are 3 of these on Earth, 1 in the United States, 1 in Australia, and 1 in Spain. So, you can keep in mind that these are the antennas that directly receive data from the Moon. If I happen to explain things a bit out of order, reading through this again should help you organize the information. Alright, this is the summary. By successfully achieving direct-to-Earth in the IM Theta mission, they secured an additional contract with NSNX. And, starting from 2026, until when? You could say until 2029, they plan to deploy a total of 5 relay satellites. This is the content of the 4.82 billion Zhejiang contract, but there's a bit more to it. This is also something worth considering. So, now, data communication with the Moon is happening directly. But then, why does NSS bother to launch satellites? Well, think about the far side of the Moon or the South Pole. In the South Pole area, it's hard to send and receive data directly. That's why relay satellites become necessary. So, you don't need a high-power antenna for direct-to-Earth communication anymore. That means we don't have to install those antennas that consume a lot of energy like we did with IM2, and if direct-to-Earth communication isn't possible for some reason, we can use this relay satellite. Instead, it can also be used as a backup. So, that's how I looked into the NSNS business. I checked out the project. Now, there's something else interesting here. It's really fascinating, but if you look here, where is it? Here, revenue generation beyond initial 150, wait. Oh, that's not it. It says received authorization, so they've gotten approval. If, for example, they successfully land the satellite. On the moon, NASA has given them permission to use it with companies other than NASA. So if you look here, there's a pay-by-the-minute service. They'll be able to charge a certain fee per minute and generate additional revenue. That's how we can understand it from the NSNS project. Does that make sense? You really need to understand this. Alright, let's take a look. Here's the 2025 outlook. If you look at the full year revenue for 2025, they're saying it's between $250 and $300 million. This time, it's coming out to $228 million, so it doesn't seem like it's increasing that much. It looks like it'll increase gradually, over the long term. And there's talk about turning a profit, EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA. They're saying that in the fourth quarter, so the fourth quarter of 2025, it looks like they'll turn a profit. And for the whole year, for the entire year, to see positive adjusted EBITDA, they're saying that's something to look forward to in 2026. So, just keep in mind that this is the outlook they've given. And then, during the Q&A session of the conference call, there were a few questions. One interesting thing was, remember yesterday I talked about the LTV, the Lunar Terrain Vehicle. I mentioned that it would be interesting to watch that video, and regarding this, when asked when the announcement would be made, they said they expect it to be in the second half of 2015. I did it, so keep that in mind as well. Then there's Nobody, which I mentioned earlier. The one I said was bigger than Novasi. This is exactly what it looks like. It looks like this, and it can carry more payloads here and get more work done. So, if you look here, I briefly compared Novasi and Novidi. Novidi is intended for large infrastructure and heavy cargo transport. If the LTV lunar rover gets selected, they'll probably load it onto this, right? Next, for your reference, the maximum payload capacity is up to 100 kilograms, while for the larger version, it's 500 to 750 kilograms. It's good to keep this in mind, but for now, since they're still designing and developing it, details like how they'll handle power, lifespan, or how it will adapt to the landing terrain haven't been disclosed yet, so just keep that in mind. So, they say that this Novidi will be used for missions after 2017. You might remember from earlier that I mentioned IM-4 will be carrying 2 relay satellites. That was in 2007. So, maybe, Novidi could be used for IM-4 as well. That's another possibility to consider. It would be good to keep that in mind as well. And then, there's also this. In the first half of this year, they're planning to conduct a preliminary design review of the LTV together with NASA. So basically, they're going to check whether they're building it properly and what the design looks like, just to do a thorough review. They said that this important schedule has already been set. Next, in May, there will be a corporate bidding for NASA's CS-6 mission, which is part of their Payload Services program. And the announcement of which company wins the contract will be made in July. So I looked this up. And actually, if you look at the slide shown earlier, you can get a better understanding of how Intuitive Machines wins contracts and what they're working on. Let's take a look. Now, if you look here, it says CLPS CS6 Payload Workshop, and this is material from NASA, from February 2025. What this is about, if you look here, it says Lunar Surface Study. If I were to translate this into Korean, it would probably go something like this. So, it's a study about how the lunar surface changes when a lunar lander touches down on the moon. Why are they studying this? Well, it's extremely important for a lunar lander to land safely. But after landing, the lander shouldn't collapse, right? That's why they're investigating this now. Alright, let's take a look. If you look at this picture here, it'll make sense. This is the lunar lander. This part is the lunar lander, and from here, gas and flames will be coming out. So, what do you think will happen to the lunar surface here? It'll get worn away. It'll be eroded like this. There will be dust flying everywhere and, you know, all that stuff. because the high-pressure gas coming out of the lunar lander digs into the ground and causes all sorts of things. These really complex phenomena will happen here. Studying these phenomena is what CS6 is all about. So now they're saying that intuitive machines is going to bid for this. If you look here, surface regolith, basically, that's just dust. And then rocket plume means the high-pressure gas being expelled, you know. And then, since the lunar surface gets eroded, and you never know where things might fly off to, they're saying they're going to study this. So, what exactly did they do here? You can also take a quick look at the payload. If it gets loaded, we'll attach a camera underneath the spacecraft. You see the camera, right? This is how we attach the camera. So, after landing on the moon, like this, you need to observe what the ground looks like, right? That's why they're saying they'll use the camera to observe it. They're saying that the camera will be installed like this. And it also shows what kind of electronic devices, like the motherboard, will be loaded. If you look here, there's the camera assembly, and then there's a laser as well. There are also things related to wide-angle optics and various other components, and they're telling other clients and companies that these are the things they'll be taking with them. So not Luna. It's Intuitive Machines that is looking at this and building it. So, as you can see, it's actually showing that things like the camera, laser, and then this disco ball, these kinds of things, will be loaded. And it also details exactly when each will operate. If you look here, it says that from an altitude of 50 meters down to 5 meters, they'll be using the altimeter. But what are they doing? With 2 cameras, they're going to take photos, like shooting a video, at about 8 to 10 frames per second. Then, from an altitude of 30 meters until 10 seconds after touchdown, they'll allocate about 0.5 gigabytes to take photos with 4 cameras. So, as you can see, the mission plan is laid out in detail like this. That's the current CS6 mission. So, it seems like Intuitive Machines is building the equipment and designing the payload in this way. I think it would be good for you to just take a look at it. At this point, putting aside the topic of CS6 for now, let's turn our attention to SET. Specifically, regarding Luna, it is important to note that the current price of Luna's stock stands at $8.93 per share. This is the most recent value available for Luna's stock in the market. It's dropped quite a bit. But the reason it's dropped isn't because the company isn't doing its job, but simply because the market's interest has faded a bit. So, for me, whether it's Luna, Redwire, Rocket Lab, or Black Sky, when their prices are down, I personally think it's a good buying opportunity. But, there's one thing that bothers me a bit if their current assets are $193 million. Earlier I mentioned they had about $300 million. But if you look here, in the last quarter of 2024, the cash they spent, well, there might be some non-cash items too, but they said it was $159 million. That's just for one quarter. One quarter. So, when you look at it that way, this $300 million in capital only provides a very short cash runway. If you really do the math, it only lasts for 2 quarters. So, yeah, I think this is something we really need to take into consideration. You can't just blindly say, oh, of course what they're doing is great, but they don't have any cash. Cash! Remember back in the day, there was a company called Terran Orbital, ticker symbol LLAP. They were amazing at building satellites, and they had a huge backlog of orders. They had a ton of orders, but what was the problem back then? They didn't have any money. So what happened because they had no money? Their biggest client, Lockheed Martin, ended up acquiring them. When an acquisition like this happens, everyone holding Terran Orbital stock just gets their investment back in cash. Anyway, that's how things played out, and just like with Terran Orbital, Intuitive Machines is in a similar situation when it comes to cash flow. I think that's a good way to sum it up. Okay, got it. I think that's a good place to wrap things up, but if you have any more questions, or if I made any mistakes in what I said, please let me know. So if you have any comments, I'd appreciate it if you leave them below, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. That's it for today's video. I'll end it here. Take care.